6. When you inhale, feel the breath vibrate off the back of the throat. When you exhale, whisper the word "ah." Whisper the word "ah." Whisper the word "ah." Whisper the word "ah." Got it? Let's go. Got it? Let's go. Whisper the word "ah." Whisper the word "ah."
Their feelings, their inner feelings of subjective creativity.
Well, hey there, I'm Boom. Welcome to my world. Today I want to talk about an album which is one of my favouriteest albums of all time. It is Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds. This is something that came out in 1978. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I grew up listening to this album. I still rate it. I think everybody needs a copy of this album. It was an adaptation of H.G. Wells' story about a Martian invasion of Earth. In a greater sense, Wells was actually writing about colonialism and the way the British Empire invaded countries with indigenous populations and basically took over. So in The War of the Worlds, Wells turns the tables and makes Britain the victim, in this case of a invasion by a force that they're unable to fight against. That's academic. It's not really relevant to this version of the story, which is all Martians and heat rays and stuff, but that's an interesting background on it. Now, when Jeff Wayne made this album, it was really produced around the concept of the 12-inch vinyl. It's presented in 4 episodes, 1 episode per side, approximately 25 minutes long for each episode. The gatefold sleeve with booklet inside, all this wonderful artwork. It really was built around this format. So this is the ultimate format, really, to enjoy this record in. When Wayne proposed this album to the record label CBS, it was actually only going to be a single album, and so he was a little bit nervous about presenting a double album, especially an untested kind of a concept. And indeed, CBS were concerned about whether they could market and sell this LP as a double album. Jeff Wayne was prepared for this, and he actually had already produced an edited version of the album, which basically featured all the songs on the album and tied together with a more brief version of the storyline, designed so that radio stations could easily play the songs and promote the album. And this was actually the clincher which made this possible. Had Wayne not produced this single version of the album and presented it to CBS, they may not have gambled on the full double album. This was a promotional only thing at the time. You can see the black and white promotional label. It was subsequently released a few years later commercially as the highlights from War of the Worlds that you can see there. Again, it's predominantly just the songs from the record and a little bit of narration tying it all together. You really got to have the whole thing, though. This is just a taster, if you like, is the highlights version. The album itself spawned 5 singles, which is a pretty decent effort, really. The first single was The Eve of the War, which is the big overture from the album, sung by Justin Hayward for the Moody Blues. And this was a huge hit at the time. It was produced as a disco. This 12-inch was actually circulated to DJs and radio stations a white label 12-inch, which is a 7-minute disco version of the track. There's a 4.5-minute disco version on the B-side, which is more appropriate for radio stations to be able to play. So that in itself was a big boost for the album, and the disco version itself was also released as a single. An interesting curiosity about this song was that Jeff Wayne also had one of the other people who appeared on the album, Chris Thompson, who was the singer for Man's Earth Band. Chris Thompson also recorded a version of this song which was released as a single, but not on the LP. So it's essentially the same song but with a different vocal. As I said, you can't get this on the LP version. The only way you can get this version the only way you could get this version was on the 7-inch single. Actually, this is an Australian version which never came with the actual picture sleeve, but came with a really cool War of the Worlds label. That's also the Chris Thompson version of the song. Now, the second single off of the album was also Justin Hayward, and that was Forever Autumn, which was a big ballad, and it actually became like one of Justin Hayward's sort of signature songs that he played in his live performances and that for a long time afterwards, and was really well known for it. It was a huge hit at the time. Again, another single from the album, which just helped the album sell millions and millions of copies. In fact, about 15 million copies I think the album sold. The third single from the album was featuring Chris Thompson, which was the Thunderchild song, and it also featured him on lead guitar. And as I mentioned, Chris Thompson with the alternative version of The Eve of the War. This single was also available as a maxi, which was a popular format at the time, the 12-inch single. So, the very cool picture sleeves to collect. The fourth single from this album was by David Essex, was Brave New World. Now, I don't believe that this was released in the US. I don't think David Essex had much of a career in the US, but outside of the US he was pretty big business. And Jeff Wayne, one of his earlier jobs was he worked with David Essex on David Essex's debut album, and a lot of the session players that played on that album actually appear on War of the Worlds. They're some of the best session players in England, actually, but made for a really fantastic lineup of musicians, both independent celebrity musicians and the best of the session world. So yeah, that was that fourth single. The fifth and final single that was released from the album was this one, Horsell Common and the Heat Ray, which was more of an instrumental than an actual song. But if you know the album, it's a cracker of a tune. And again, you know, just the tune in itself got itself a lot of radio airplay at the time, and all of these things, the 5 singles, all contributed heavily to the album being the success that it was. In fact, so successful.
Nathaniel, ich habe gesehen, wie die Kirche in Flammen stand. Wie geht es dir?
Fass mich nicht an.
Aber ich bin
It was also done as a German language version, and this particular German language version of the album has Richard Burton's part, and obviously Richard Burton was the star of the basic album, narrated by Kurt Jürgens. Now, Kurt Jürgens was a German actor who I do believe appeared in one of the James Bond films as a villain. I think it was Carl Stromberg in The Spy Who Loved Me, was played by Kurt Jürgens. And an interesting connection was that Kurt Jurgens also appeared in a film alongside Richard Burton, a World War II action film from way back, which is an interesting little connection that they would be tied again in the future to this LP. Speaking of Richard Burton, there's an interesting story about the album, is that Burton was Wayne's first and only real choice for the narrator on this record. He didn't have anybody else in mind. He was determined to get Richard Burton. Made several attempts to contact Richard Burton through his agent, got no real response there. So he attended a live performance, a stage performance that Richard Burton was involved in, and he actually asked one of the stagehands if he'd leave a script for this album on Richard Burton's dressing room doorstep with a little note attached to it. And as fate would have it, apparently Burton had only just finished reading H.G. Wells' book at the time and found the timing of the script landing on his doorstep basically intriguing and was quite enthusiastic to take on the part. And it has become one of the most recognisable narrations of a sort of any record. In fact, the opening passage, if you know the record, the Slowly They Drew Their Plans Against Us, originally actually had music to accompany it, and Burton's narration was so powerful that they decided to drop the musical element altogether and simply just leave the voice unaccompanied. Another little piece of trivia I can tell you about Richard Burton is that after he agreed to do it, Wayne had booked a whole week in the studio, which he thought would be adequate to record all the dialogue necessary for the narration for the album. When Burton turned up, Wayne offered to walk him through the musical and sort of discuss how it was going to be done. Burton said, "I've read the script, I don't need to do that, not interested in hearing the record, let's go," and pretty much nailed the entire thing in one session. That was the degree of professionalism that you got from Sir Richard Burton, and I believe at the end of the recording it was only necessary for him to come back for 3 hours to record some last minute little revisions that Jeff Wayne wanted him to record. So, you know, the work of an absolute professional there. It wasn't just a German language variant that existed either. There was in fact Guerra de los Mundos, which was a Spanish language version. Now, if you're looking out for this record or you come across it, there is several different versions of this. This one here with the version Espanol on it. This is an entirely new cast, although the songs are still the same. This is a re-recorded Spanish language version of the record. It's quite interesting that it's different and that they've gone to like such great extent. There is another version of Guerra de los Mundos, which has got version Inglés on it, which is basically the original LP, so that's no different to listen to as opposed to the Spanish version. There is a third version as well of Guerra de los Mundos, which was just simply a voiceover done by an actor, Anthony Quinn, and that's voiced over in, this is the European Spanish. It's voiced over in the South American Spanish, which is a slightly different dialect. So, 3 different versions of this. Spanish language, it was between the Spanish and the German and the English, covered a lot of ground. I do believe there may have been talk about it being done in other languages as well, but that sort of never eventuated. So that's the the alternate language versions of the album, which are out there, which you may stumble across. Great, cool things to add to your collection. If you're looking for the ultimate listening experience, the half-speed master edition of this is sensational. In the early 1980s, CBS released a whole range of albums in this half-speed mastered format, which is basically a technique where they run the master tape back at half the speed when they capture it to cut the disc, which theoretically captures a lot more detail. It also has an extended frequency range, which means you get much lower lows and higher highs. Spectrum is incredible on this, and I always tell people that if you're setting up a stereo, or you're testing a stereo, you're looking to buy a new stereo or whatever, this album is the album that you want as your companion. It doesn't have to be this fantastic half-speed mastered version of the album. The regular version will do. It's such a dynamic record, recorded to an incredibly high standard, that it is the one. You drop the needle on this record and it is just insanely good. If I can just quickly for 1 minute get back to talking about the singles from the album. As I told you, there was 5 singles from the album. There was one song on this album which never made it as a single. There was a song called The Spirit of Man, which featured Julie Covington from the original Evita Andrew Lloyd Webber production. Also featured this guy, Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy, which is a great song. Unfortunately didn't make it as a single, but curiously enough, Jeff Wayne's original choice was this guy here, Paul Rodgers from Free. Now, Paul Rodgers actually came in and recorded that part for Jeff Wayne. He wasn't confident about doing the voice acting part, although he recorded the song for the album. In the end, that was actually shelved, and I do believe that tape exists in the archives. It is still as yet unreleased, but the Paul Rodgers version of Spirit of Man is hopefully something that we get to hear someday, so that'll be a really great one. Talking about too, the artwork for this, which is just sensational, and I have briefly touched on the booklet and all the artwork that accompanies this amazing package. Originally, the person produced to design this was none other than Roger Dean, who is one of the most well-known artists as far as album cover artwork goes. Did a lot of album covers for a lot of different people. Got a couple of examples here to show you. Obviously, Uriah Heep was one. He did Budgie, was another one. Did several albums for Budgie. Did a lot of progressive rock albums. Fantastic album by Paladin. Great picture on the cover there. And of course, a lot of albums for Yes. Very famous for doing the Yes album covers. Incidentally, also designed the original Virgin Records logo that you can see here. As well as that, he designed the Vertigo spaceship logo. So he was involved in a lot of rock music, and particularly in progressive music circles. Did a lot of artwork for that. The original pictures that he did for War of the Worlds were not what Wayne really was looking for. They, I think they're a bit too biological for Wayne's liking, and so he went with some other artists to produce that artwork. In the end, Roger Dean repurposed those drawings for the video game The Pteropods, so they weren't completely wasted. Just interesting little bit of trivia for you. This logo here on the War of the Worlds, this classic logo here, that was designed by the same guy who designed the Rolling Stones tongue logo. So there's a piece of useless trivia for you that you'll never use again. Just to finish up with this, there is a couple more things. Save the best till last. picture disc edition of The Eve of the War. Now, absolutely, some things just work magnificently on picture disc, and this is one of them. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful disc there. You'll notice this has a white rim around the disc. There's two editions of this. One had a white rim and one had a black rim. The black rim seems to be a lot more common than the white rim. Doesn't make a lot of difference to collector's value. War of the Worlds is something that's quite economical to collect. Lots of cool stuff to collect. It's not like collecting the Beatles or something like that where it's mega expensive. I say lots of cool things to collect there. The very, very final thing that I'm going to show you today is something that you're extremely unlikely to find. This is an original test disc of the War of the Worlds, and it has completely blank labels there. It's a double album version, blank white jacket, blank all over. If you're a record collector already, you'll know that test pressings were done at various stages of production. There was initial test pressings done which test the pressure of the press, the duration, whole lot of parameters that can be dialed in to get the optimum most out of the record. Those rarely get into circulation. They're usually an in-house thing only. Then there is this kind of the ultimate test pressing, which happens just prior to the album actually being the green light going for the album to be put into full production. These are generally like a listening playback copy of the album. Usually 10 to 20 copies would be how many there are. Sometimes more. Given how uncommon this one is, I would say this is quite a low number. I only sort of think I can have seen maybe one other copy of this come up for sale, and it actually had writing all over the handwritten labels and stuff like that. So this is particularly rare. From a collector's point of view, it's really interesting because one of the plates here has a different set of matrix etchings to what the final what the final record actually has in the matrix etchings, which means for some reason one of those plates was changed. I can't hear any flaws in it, which is one of the things obviously that they check for a test pressing. I don't know if they made a change to the record. I didn't notice anything specifically. This is most likely a playback copy that was given to a certain number of people involved in making the record that had to sign off on the record before they could put it into production. Sometimes test pressings are given out as promos. They do a whole run of them, and after they're done, they hand them out as promotional things. In this instance, I don't believe this was the case, especially with no identification on it. It's unlikely that this was handed out as a promotional item. It would kind of be anti-promotion in a way if you handed out a completely blank record. To say, extremely, extremely rare. To me, it's a treasure. As I said, collecting War of the Worlds is not a huge monetary thing. It's a fun thing to do, so it's not worth any enormous amount of money. Certainly is the rarest of the War of the Worlds items that I own. So that's a bit of a look at some of the really cool War of the Worlds stuff that there is out there. A couple more things that I could show you just briefly. As I showed you the Spanish version of the album earlier on, that there is a Spanish edition of Forever Autumn, and also a Spanish version of The Eve of the War. Slightly different picture sleeves there than the regular ones. Again, something really cool to collect. to build up a great selection of War of the Worlds items. So there you have it. The Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds, one of the greatest albums ever. Some really cool things to collect there. Some things that you can find when you're out there digging crates. Things that won't cost you the earth if you want to track them down. Fantastic album. Absolutely a must own. So thanks guys. See you next time.
Whisper the word ah.